The temperature had dropped to 23 degrees by the time they set my suitcase on the porch. Not a bag, not a box, a suitcase. Brown leather, the one Walter bought me for our 30th anniversary trip to Savannah that we never took because he got sick the week before we were supposed to leave. That suitcase had been sitting in the top of the hall closet for 11 years. Someone had gone up there, pulled it down, and packed it. They had planned this before Christmas morning, before the prayer, before the ham and the sweet potato pie, and my granddaughter Amara sitting on my lap asking me to read the tags on her presents. They had planned this while I was sleeping in the room down the hall. It was 11:47 p.m. on December 25th. The door closed behind me. I heard the deadbolt turn. Not a click, a thud. The kind that means someone leaned into it with their full weight. The porch light was on. I remember thinking that was almost polite. At least they left the light on. I stood there for a moment in my house slippers, the burgundy ones with the little rubber soles that Amara had wrapped in tissue paper and put under the tree. And I looked at that suitcase sitting beside the porch railing, and I felt something I was not expecting to feel. Not anger, not humiliation, not cold, though it was cold enough that my breath was coming out in small white clouds. What I felt was clarity. I had been waiting for this moment for 14 months. I had been preparing for this moment for 14 months, and now it had arrived, on Christmas night, with a deadbolt and a suitcase and 23 degrees, and the distant sound of someone's fireworks left over from the week before. And all I could think was, they have made the last mistake they are ever going to make with me. I picked up the suitcase. I walked down the porch steps slowly, because the bottom step had a crack in it that I had asked to have fixed 3 times, and no one had fixed it, and I was not going to break my ankle on Christmas night over a cracked step that I owned. I walked to the end of the driveway. I set the suitcase down on the sidewalk. I took out my phone. I called one number. It rang twice. Dorothy? Her voice was alert. She had been waiting. It happened, I said. She said, "Okay," I said. "Tonight." She said, "I know. I'm already in the car." And then I did something that I imagine, from inside that house, must have looked like the strangest thing they had ever seen a woman do on a December night after being put out in the cold. I smiled, because they had just handed me everything I needed. They had locked me out of a house that was still, and would always remain, mine. And by morning, they would understand exactly what that meant. Before I tell you what happened, before I walk you through every single moment of that night and the morning that followed, I need to ask you something, and I need you to sit with it honestly. Have you ever been in a situation where someone who was supposed to love you decided that their comfort was worth more than your dignity? Where they looked at everything you had given, your time, your home, your patience, your silence, and decided that it simply wasn't enough to earn you basic decency, because that is what this story is about. Not Christmas, not family drama, not who said what over dinner. This story is about what happens when a woman who has spent 67 years being quiet, being careful, being the one who holds everything together, decides that she is done being the one who holds everything together for people who are actively working to take everything from her. If you have ever been underestimated by someone who lived under your roof, this story is for you. If you found this video, do me a favor and hit that like button right now. It helps other people find stories like this one, and I believe someone out there tonight needs to hear this. And if you're new here, subscribe to Still Waters. I tell these stories slowly, the way they deserve to be told. Now, before we go any further, I want to know where you are right now. Drop it in the comments. Where are you watching from? And what time is it there? I'm always amazed at how far these stories travel. Someone watching from Georgia at midnight. Someone in London over their morning coffee. Someone in the Philippines on their lunch break. We are all sitting here together, in the still water. I see you. Now, let me take you back to the beginning. My name is Dorothy Mae Caldwell. I was born in Montgomery, Alabama, in 1957, the fourth of 6 children, in a house that my father built with his own hands on a half-acre lot that his father had bought during a time when black men buying land in Alabama was an act of radical defiance. That land stayed in our family. My father impressed upon every one of us, from the time we were old enough to understand words, that land is not furniture. Land is not a car. Land is not something you walk away from or borrow against carelessly, or allow someone else to manage on your behalf without watching every single transaction with both eyes open. Dorothy May, he used to say, sitting on that porch with his coffee. A piece of paper with your name on it is the most powerful thing in the world. More powerful than a gun. More powerful than a speech. You keep your papers. I kept my papers. I spent 32 years as a certified public accountant in Birmingham, Alabama. I worked for a mid-sized firm for the first 12 years, and then I opened my own practice, Caldwell Financial Services, in 1989, the same year my son Marcus turned 3 years old. I built that practice from one folding table in a rented office to a 4-person operation with a client list that included 3 county municipalities and a regional hospital system. I was not wealthy in the way people mean when they say wealthy, but I was stable. I was documented. I was careful. I married Walter Caldwell in 1981. He was a high school history teacher, the kind of teacher whose students came back to visit 10, 15 years later because he had changed something in them. Walter was gentle and funny, and occasionally infuriating in the way that only truly good men can be infuriating. He believed the best of everyone, including people who had not earned it. He died of pancreatic cancer in March of 2013. He was 58 years old. We had been married for 31 years. I kept working. I kept my practice open. I sold it in 2019, at 62, to a younger CPA named Renata, who I had mentored for 6 years, and who I knew would take care of my clients the way they deserved. I retired with enough. Enough was what I had always worked for. Not excess, but enough. The house was paid off. Walter's life insurance was invested conservatively. My Social Security, when I started drawing it, covered my monthly expenses with room to breathe. The house. Let me tell you about the house. It is a craftsman bungalow in a quiet neighborhood in Decatur, Georgia. 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, a screened porch off the back, a magnolia tree in the front yard that Walter planted the year we moved in. The house is mine. It was always mine. My name alone is on the deed. I had insisted on that from the beginning, not out of suspicion of Walter, but out of the principle my father had taught me. Keep your papers. Know what you own. After Walter died, my son Marcus moved back to Decatur. He had been living in Atlanta, working in sales, going through what I can only describe as a prolonged period of not finding his footing. He was 43 when he moved back. His daughter Amara was 5. His marriage to Keisha had ended the year before. Not badly, they were decent to each other, and they shared custody of Amara in a way that seemed to work for everyone, especially Amara, who is the brightest, most perceptive child I have ever encountered in my 67 years. Marcus asked if he could stay with me while he got back on his feet. Of course I said yes. He is my son. This was his father's house. I made up the back bedroom, the one with the window that looks out at the magnolia tree, and I told him to stay as long as he needed. That was in 2020. What I did not fully account for, what I underestimated, the way we sometimes underestimate the things we love, was Renee. Renee came into Marcus's life about 8 months after he moved in. She was 41, a paralegal from Smyrna, and she was, when I first met her, genuinely charming. Attentive. She brought things when she came for dinner, a bottle of wine, a pound cake, once a pot of soup because I'd mentioned I had a cold. She called me Miss Dorothy with a warmth that felt real. She made Marcus laugh in a way I hadn't heard him laugh since before Keisha, since before the divorce, since before he'd lost a little of himself in all those years of trying and almost making it. I liked her. I want to be honest about that. I liked Renee. And then Marcus asked me if she could move in, and I said yes, and something shifted. Not immediately, not dramatically. These things never happen all at once. A house is not taken by storm. It is taken room by room, decision by decision, in increments so small that you can almost convince yourself you imagined each one. It started with small things. The kitchen organized differently. My platters moved to a lower cabinet because Renee said she'd almost knocked one off the high shelf and didn't want it to break. My chair, the armchair in the living room where I sat every morning with my coffee and my Bible and my crossword, where I had sat every morning for 26 years, moved 3 feet to the left so that the couch could be repositioned. Nobody asked me. I came downstairs one morning and the chair was simply in a different place. I moved it back. Renee mentioned, pleasantly, that she'd thought the new arrangement opened up the room. I said pleasantly that I liked it where it was. The chair stayed where I put it, but then other things. Marcus started handling some of my household bills. He'd offered, said he wanted to contribute, which I appreciated and which I allowed for the utilities and the cable, things that fluctuated and were easy to track. I kept the mortgage documentation, the insurance, all of it, in a fireproof box in my bedroom closet. That box was mine. That box had been mine for decades. I told Marcus, gently but clearly, that my financial documents were not something I needed help with. Renee started asking about the house, not accusatorially, casually, the way you ask about things you're curious about. What would this place be worth now, with the market the way it is? Do you have a financial advisor? Have you thought about downsizing? Some of those retirement communities are really lovely, Miss Dorothy. My aunt moved into one in Marietta and she loves it. I heard every word of it. I am an accountant. I spent 32 years listening to what people said and what people meant, and those two things are not always the same. In October of last year, 14 months before Christmas, I had a conversation with my son that I have replayed many times since. It was a Tuesday evening. After dinner, Amara in bed, Renee in the living room with the television on. Marcus sat down across from me at the kitchen table and told me, with genuine love in his eyes, that he thought it might be time for me to think about my long-term living situation. He used those words. Long-term living situation. I asked him what he meant. He said he'd been talking to a financial planner, one Renee had recommended, and that they thought with the equity in the house, I could be very comfortable in an assisted living facility. He said the word facility the way people say words they've rehearsed. He said there were some really beautiful places. He said he and Renee could help me with the move. He said it with so much careful love that it took me a full 10 seconds to understand what I was hearing. My son was sitting at my kitchen table, in my house, telling me that I should move to a facility so that he and Renee could have the house. I did not raise my voice. I looked at Marcus for a long moment. I saw his father in his eyes, Walter's exact same brown, Walter's same way of tilting his head slightly when he was uncertain. I felt grief move through me like a wave, clean and total. And then I said very quietly, Marcus, I am 66 years old. I am in excellent health. I do not need assisted living. And this house is mine. He said, Mama, I know that, but I know you know that. I said, I want to make sure we both remember it. I went upstairs. I made a phone call to my attorney, Vivian Park, and then I began to keep records. Every conversation, every request, every rearrangement, every suggestion about facilities and long-term living situations, and what the market would bear. I wrote it all down. Date, time, what was said, who was present. I kept my papers. The thing about living in a house with people who are plotting against you is that they become careless. They cannot help it. They are building a story in their heads, a story in which they are reasonable and you are fragile, a story in which they are forward-thinking, and you are simply too old to understand what's best for you. And when you are living inside your own story, you stop watching the edges. I watch the edges. I want to tell you what I found, and how I found it, and what I did with what I found. 3 months after my conversation with Marcus, January, the year before last, I received a call from my bank. I had set up account alerts years ago, Walter's suggestion originally, a habit I'd kept. The alert was routine. A large inquiry on my home equity had triggered a notification. An inquiry, not an application, not a withdrawal. An inquiry, meaning someone had requested information about the equity line of credit attached to my property. I had not made that inquiry. I called the bank's fraud line. I spoke to a woman named Patricia, who was patient and thorough. She confirmed that someone had called the bank posing as me, asking about the process for accessing a home equity line of credit, asking about the current equity value, asking what documentation would be required. The call had come from a number I did not recognize. I wrote all of this down. I called Vivian. Vivian said, "Dorothy, are you ready to do what needs to be done?" I said I needed a little more time. I needed it to be undeniable. I went back to being quiet. Meanwhile, what Renee was doing. In February, Renee had lunch with a real estate attorney named Dale Humphreys. I know this because Amara told me, not knowing what she was telling me. Amara, 7 years old, perceptive as a laser beam, mentioned one afternoon while we were doing her spelling homework that Daddy and Renee had gone to lunch with a man in a suit, and that Renee had carried a folder, and that they'd left Amara with the neighbor for 3 hours. Children notice folders. Children notice that adults stop talking when they walk into a room. I looked up Dale Humphreys. He specialized in estate planning and property transfers. I wrote it down. In March, I found the document. I had gone into Marcus's room, his room, the room I owned, to return a sweater of his that had gotten mixed in with my laundry. His laptop was open on the desk. I was not snooping. I was returning a sweater. But the screen was open, and what was on the screen was an email chain between Marcus and someone named D. Humphreys, and the subject line said, Transfer Strategy, Caldwell Property. I did not touch the laptop. I stood in the doorway of my son's room, in my house, holding his sweater, and I read what I could read from where I was standing. It was enough. The strategy was this: establish that Dorothy Mae Caldwell was experiencing cognitive decline. Document instances of confusion or erratic behavior. Have her evaluated by a physician, one they had apparently already identified. Use the evaluation to petition for guardianship. Once guardianship was established, transfer the property. They were going to argue that I was losing my mind. I stood in that doorway for 30 seconds. I put the sweater on the end of his bed. I walked back downstairs. I made myself a cup of tea. I sat at the kitchen table and I drank it. And then I called Vivian Park and I said, "It's time." What I did in the months that followed, Vivian moved on several fronts simultaneously. First, she contacted my physician, Dr. Annette Osei, who has been my doctor for 19 years, and who knows my cognitive baseline better than anyone, and requested a comprehensive cognitive evaluation. Full battery. Documented. Dr. Osei, once I explained the situation, understood immediately and moved it up on her schedule. The results came back in April. I scored in the 97th percentile for my age cohort. Dr. Osei wrote a letter. It went into a file. Second, Vivian reviewed the bank records I had gathered. The inquiry on the equity line was traceable. She consulted with a colleague in elder law. We documented everything. Third, and this is the one that mattered most, Vivian filed an updated and notarized statement of sole property ownership with the county recorder's office, reaffirming that I was the sole owner of the Decatur property and was mentally competent at the time of filing. It was a protective filing. Vivian had done it before for other clients. It makes any future claim of cognitive incapacity significantly harder to argue. Fourth, I updated my estate documents. Everything clear, everything airtight, everything in Amara's name for the future. Not Marcus's, not Renee's, Amara's. Through a trust that Vivian structured so that it could not be contested without years of expensive litigation that would cost more than the house was worth. Marcus and Renee did not know any of this. They were still building their story. They were still dropping small comments at dinner about how I'd seemed confused at the grocery store, how I'd repeated myself the other day, little seeds they were planting. I heard every seed. I noted every seed. I said nothing. The 5 weeks before Christmas, they accelerated. I believe they had a timeline. The real estate market in Decatur was strong, and I believe they had spoken to someone about listing the property in the new year, which meant they needed the guardianship petition filed before January. Renee started keeping notes on her phone. I know this because one evening she left her phone on the kitchen counter when she went to answer the door, and I saw the app open. It was a plain notes app, a list, and at the top it said Dorothy Incidents, and below it were dates and descriptions. Things like asked Marcus same question twice at dinner and forgot trash day again, and seemed agitated when asked about finances. I read 3 items before I set the phone face down on the counter the way I'd found it. I had never asked Marcus the same question twice. I had never forgotten trash day. I had not seemed agitated about finances. I had calmly deflected a question about my investment accounts that had no business being asked. They were writing fiction. They were writing it on a phone in my kitchen in my house. 2 weeks before Christmas, Marcus sat me down and suggested that perhaps over the holidays, while family was together, it might be a good time to have a conversation about my care plan going forward. He had printed something, an actual printed document, which he called a family care agreement. It had spaces for signatures. It described a scenario in which I would voluntarily transfer management of my finances to Marcus, agree to a physician evaluation every 90 days, and acknowledge that major decisions regarding the property would be made jointly with my son. He slid it across the kitchen table. I looked at it. I looked at him. "I'll think about it," I said. I took the document upstairs. I photographed every page. I sent the photographs to Vivian. I wrote the date and time on a notepad. December 11th, 2024, 7:18 p.m. Marcus presented family care agreement. Document removed from kitchen table and photographed. Returning document now. I went back downstairs and put the document back on the table. "Have you thought about it?" Marcus asked. I said I'd think about it. I said. I went to bed. The night before Christmas. Renee made a phone call that she believed I could not hear. The house has a particular acoustic quality. Walter and I had discovered it in the first year we lived there. Sound travels along the wall of the upstairs hallway in a way that you would not expect. If you stand at the top of the stairs with the hall door open and someone is speaking in the kitchen directly below, you hear them as clearly as if they were in the room with you. I was standing at the top of the stairs at 10:43 p.m. on Christmas Eve. Renee was in the kitchen. She was speaking to Dale Humphreys. She said, "We're going to move on it this weekend, after Christmas. We'll have what we need." She said, "She has no idea." She said, "By the end of January, it'll be done." I went back to my room. I sat on the edge of my bed. I looked at Walter's photograph on the nightstand, the one from our 10th anniversary, him laughing at something off camera, full and alive. "Walter," I whispered, "they don't know who they are dealing with." I opened my phone and I sent Vivian one text message. It said, "Tomorrow." She replied within 2 minutes, "Ready." I slept. Christmas morning was by every external measure lovely. Amara woke at 6:15 and could not be contained. She came to my room first. She always came to my room first, and I loved her for it. And she climbed into my bed in her pajamas with the little reindeer on them, and she put her cold feet against my legs and said, "Grandma Dorothy, is it time?" "Almost time, baby," I said. "How close is almost?" "Close enough for you to go wake your father." She launched herself off the bed like a small missile. I heard her down the hall, Marcus's door, the particular thud of a 7-year-old with no concept of a sleeping household. I got dressed, burgundy sweater, good earrings, my hair neat. I went downstairs and I made coffee. Renee came down at 7:30 in a robe, her hair wrapped, and she said, "Good morning, Miss Dorothy." And she smiled, and I said, "Good morning, Renee." And I smiled, and we were both lying. Christmas proceeded. Presents, ham in the oven. Amara's delight at a art kit she'd wanted. At books. At a small telescope that Marcus had saved up for. She sat in my lap after the presents were open, and she read me the tags on her gifts, practicing her reading. And I held her, and I thought, everything I have done and am going to do is for this child, not for the house, not for the principal, for her. Dinner at 3, good food, careful conversation. Renee had made a green bean casserole with fried onions on top that was genuinely excellent. I told her so. We watched a movie. Amara fell asleep on the couch at 8, her telescope instruction book open across her chest. Marcus carried her to bed. It was 9:15. I said I was tired and going up. I went to my room. I called Vivian. I said, "It'll happen tonight. They'll wait until they think I'm asleep. I'll be in position by 10, she said. "Don't park in front of the house," I said. "2 houses down," she said. "I know." At 11:30, I heard footsteps in the hall. A pause outside my door. Voices, low, a consultation. Then footsteps going away. Then the creak of the hall closet, the one where I kept Walter's suitcase, the brown leather suitcase. I heard it come down from the shelf. I heard them go back downstairs. I heard the sounds of someone opening drawers in the hall. They were packing the suitcase. With my things. Things they had, apparently, moved from my room to the hall closet at some point without my noticing. Or perhaps they were packing things they felt were mine and not theirs. A curated collection of Dorothy's stuff that added up to something that said, "We thought about this." At 11:42, there was a knock at my door. It was Marcus. He opened the door without waiting, which told me everything about where his mind was. He said, "Mama, we need to talk." I was sitting in the chair by the window. I had not undressed. I was still in my burgundy sweater, my earrings in, my hands folded in my lap. This clearly surprised him. "I'm listening," I said. He came in. Renee followed, which I had expected. She stood near the door. Marcus stood near the foot of the bed. He looked at me and he said, with his father's eyes and none of his father's soul in that moment, "Mama, this isn't working. You know it isn't working. We've been trying to talk to you for months about a plan and you just shut it down every time. And we love you, we do. But we need you to understand that this isn't a forever situation. You need more support than we can give you here." I said, "What are you saying, Marcus?" He said, "We've arranged for you to stay somewhere. A place in Marietta. It's very nice." "Renee's aunt. You've arranged for me to leave my house," I said. He had the grace to look uncomfortable. "It's temporary." "Is it?" Renee spoke from the doorway. "Miss Dorothy, this is really what's best for everyone, including you. We want you to be safe and—" "Renee," I said, "I'd like to finish speaking with my son." She stopped. I looked at Marcus. I felt the grief again. That same wave, clean and total. And I let it move through me and I let it go. "Your father built a life in this house," I said. "And I built one beside it. This house was paid off in 2004. The deed has had my name, and only my name on it since 1987. You have been living here for 4 years, Marcus. Renee has been living here for 3. I have asked you for nothing. No rent. No contribution to the mortgage because there is no mortgage. I have fed you, and I have loved your child, and I have been patient in a way that your father would have recognized, and most people would not have understood. And on Christmas night, you have packed a suitcase with my things, and you are asking me to leave my own house. Mama, I am not finished." My voice was level. It did not shake. "You are not taking this house. You are not having me declared incompetent. I know about the meetings with Dale Humphreys. I know about the Dorothy incidents list on Renee's phone. I know about the call she made last night to tell Humphreys you'd be ready to file after the holidays." The room went very quiet. Marcus's face did something complicated. Renee's hand, I noticed, had moved to her phone in her pocket. "You will not find anything to file," I said. "I had a full cognitive evaluation in April. I scored in the 97th percentile. Dr. Osei's documentation is with my attorney. Every conversation we have had about this house, every family care agreement, every suggestion about facilities, every comment at dinner, has been documented, dated, and is currently sitting in a file at Vivian Park's office on Ponce de Leon Avenue." Marcus said, "Mama, we were just trying to—" "I know what you were trying to do," I said. "I have known for 14 months, now." I stood up. "The suitcase is already packed," you said. "I would like to walk out of this house on my own terms, which I am prepared to do. I will go to my car, but I want you to understand something before I do." I walked to my dresser. I opened the top drawer. I removed a manila envelope, sealed, with Vivian's office address printed on the return label. This is a copy of the documentation I referenced. Notice of an action that will be filed with the county courthouse on December 26th, tomorrow morning. I want you to read it tonight, Marcus. I want you to call a real estate attorney tonight. Not Dale Humphreys. Someone who will tell you the truth. I set the envelope on the dresser. Do not leave it on the dresser. Read it. I walked to the door. Renee stepped aside. "Mama," Marcus said, and his voice had broken, some register in it that I recognized from when he was 8 years old and had done something wrong and knew it. "Mama, where are you going?" "I'm going to sleep somewhere warm," I said, "and when you have read that envelope, you will understand the rest." I walked down the stairs. My coat was on the hook by the door. I put it on. I picked up my purse from the kitchen counter where I had placed it before dinner, already containing what I needed. I walked out the front door, down the porch steps, carefully, because of the crack in the bottom step, and I picked up the suitcase they had left there, because it was a good suitcase, and it was mine. I called Vivian. She said, "I see you. I'm coming." The drive to Vivian's house in Decatur took 11 minutes. Her guest room was warm. Her housekeeper had left soup on the stove. I ate a bowl of it at the kitchen table, while Vivian sat across from me with her reading glasses on and her own copies of the documents spread in front of her. She said, "Are you all right?" I thought about it honestly. "I'm better than I've been in 14 months, I said. At 2:00 a.m., Vivian made 2 calls. The first was to the county sheriff's department's non-emergency line. A courtesy call, she explained to an officer she knew, informing him that there might be a situation at the Caldwell property related to a property dispute she was managing, and that she wanted it on record that she had notified them. The second call was to her contact at the county recorder's office, a woman who came in early on the 26th without being asked, because Vivian had prepared her. At 7:15 a.m. on December 26th, Vivian and I drove to the county courthouse. We filed. Let me tell you what we filed. First, a formal trespass notice, properly drafted, notifying Marcus Caldwell and Renee Hartwell that they were residing in a property owned solely by Dorothy Mae Caldwell, that their occupancy was at Dorothy Mae Caldwell's discretion. And that said, discretion was hereby withdrawn, effective immediately, with a 60-day notice period as required under Georgia tenant-at-will law. Second, a restraining petition related to the Elder financial abuse investigation, because what Marcus and Renee had planned, what they had documented in emails and discussed with an attorney and attempted to execute, constituted elder financial abuse under Georgia's Adult Protective Services Act, and Vivian had referred the matter to the appropriate county authority the previous month. And we were now simply filing the formal notification that the investigation had concluded, and charges were being recommended. Third, notification to Dale Humphreys' Bar Association regarding his role in advising on a scheme involving fraudulent guardianship. The county process server arrived at the house on Maple Hill Drive at 9:47 a.m. on December 26th. Marcus answered the door. I know what happened next because Marcus called me at 10:03 a.m., and it was the most important phone call of my life. "Mama." His voice was barely audible. "Mama, there's a man at the door." "I know," I said. "He has papers." "I know." A long silence. "The envelope," he said. "I read it last night. I read it 3 times. Mama, I didn't." Renee said. "Marcus," I said. "Stop. Listen to me. I love you. I have always loved you. I am your mother. And that does not change. But what you were willing to do, what you allowed yourself to be led toward, that cannot be what you choose to be. That man is not your father's son. I heard him breathing. I heard him start to cry. Accept the papers," I said. "And then you have some very serious decisions to make. The first one is about Renee." I ended the call. Vivian handed me a cup of coffee. Outside her window, the December morning was sharp and clear. The sky, the particular deep blue that comes in Georgia after a cold front. The kind of sky that looks like it's been washed. "How do you feel?" Vivian asked. "Still," I said. The 60 days that followed were not triumphant. I want to be honest about that. Renee left the house within a week. She did not fight the trespass notice. Her own attorney, once she hired one, advised her not to. She moved to her sister's place in Smyrna. She did not say goodbye to me. She did not say goodbye to Amara. Amara asked Marcus where Renee went. Marcus told her that Renee had to go take care of some things. Amara, 7 years old and perceptive as a laser beam, said, "Is she coming back?" Marcus said, "I don't think so, baby." Amara was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Okay," and she went back to her telescope. Children know more than we tell them. They know when the air in a house has changed. The investigation into elder financial abuse proceeded. This is not a fast process. Anyone who tells you that justice moves quickly has not dealt with the legal system in any serious way. It moves, but it moves like a glacier, with immense, unhurried, irresistible force. Dale Humphreys received a formal censure from the State Bar of Georgia. His license to practice was suspended pending further review. Marcus was not criminally charged. The investigation concluded that while he had been complicit in the planning, the primary actor was Renee. And Marcus's cooperation with investigators, once he understood the full scope of what had been planned, was taken into account. The APS investigation remained on record. Marcus knew it was there. The Dorothy incidents list on Renee's phone was subpoenaed as part of the investigation. When investigators reviewed it against the documented dates, they found that several of the incidents described had occurred on days when Marcus's own text messages to Renee showed that I had been functioning entirely normally. One incident of apparent confusion had occurred on the same afternoon that Marcus had texted Renee a voice memo of our conversation, which clearly showed me correctly recalling a financial figure from 3 years prior, down to the decimal point. The fabrication was in the record now. It would stay there. Marcus and I had the conversation in February 4th, a Thursday, at my kitchen table. I had moved back into the house on January 3rd. He sat across from me in the chair where he had sat as a boy, doing homework, asking me to check his math. I made coffee. I set it in front of him. I sat down. He said, "Mama, I need you to know that I understand what I did." I said, "Tell me what you understand." He was quiet for a moment. Then, I let her convince me that you were something you weren't. That you were declining. That you couldn't manage. And part of me, he stopped. He looked at the table. Part of me wanted to believe it. Because if you couldn't manage, then the house, and I could tell myself it was taking care of you. That you weren't just taking from me. Yes. The word fell between us like a stone. "Marcus," I said, "your father was the most honest man I ever knew. He was honest even when it cost him something. That honesty is in you. I have seen it. I have seen it in the way you love Amara, in the way you treated Keisha even after everything, in the way you came back here when you were struggling because you were willing to admit you needed help. The man who sat down with Dale Humphreys and talked about transferring my property. That is not who you are. But you have to choose every day who you are. You understand me?" He said yes. I said, "And you have to choose what you tell Amara when she is old enough to ask." He looked up. "Not now," I said, "but someday she will ask, and you will have to tell her the truth. Because she is your daughter, and she deserves a father who tells the truth." He nodded. We sat in that kitchen for another hour. We did not solve anything. There was nothing to solve, no agreement to reach, no handshake to make it clean. Some things just have to be sat with. That's what still water teaches you. Not everything resolves into motion. Some things just settle. He was still in the house. My house. I had not asked him to leave. I told him he could stay. Not because of what I owed him, but because of Amara. And because the man I'd raised was still in there, somewhere under the bad decisions. And I was not going to give up on him the way he had been willing to give up on me. But things were different. Things were honest. The arrangement was now in writing. A simple rental agreement, token amount, nothing but documentation of the real relationship. He was a tenant. I was the owner. The papers said it clearly. I keep my papers. March came in warm that year. An early spring. The magnolias starting to bud before February was even finished. White flowers threatening at the tips of the branches the way they do when they're impatient. I was on the screened porch on a Saturday morning in the 3rd week of March. Coffee. My crossword. The birds making their particular Saturday morning racket in the yard. The air had that smell. Georgia March air, green and damp and alive with something just under the surface. Amara came out in her pajamas. She had her telescope. Not the small one from Christmas, but the serious one that Keisha had helped Marcus buy her for her birthday in February, because Amara had announced with complete conviction that she intended to be an astronomer. She climbed onto the porch chair next to mine, and she arranged the telescope on its little tripod, and she pointed it at the magnolia tree, because she used it for birds as well as stars. "Grandma Dorothy," she said, "Baby, did Daddy do something wrong?" I set my crossword down. I looked at her. She was looking through the telescope, her small eye pressed to the eyepiece, her voice absolutely casual. What makes you ask that? I said. Because he says sorry to you a lot now, and he didn't used to say sorry as much. And I know when people say sorry more, that means something happened. She is 7 years old. Your daddy is working some things out, I said carefully, the way grown-ups sometimes have to. Did he hurt you? I thought about that for a moment. The magnolia tree, Walter's tree, the birds. He scared me a little, I said, but I wasn't hurt. She took her eye away from the telescope, and she looked at me directly. Are you okay now? Better than okay, I said. She considered this with the gravity that only 7-year-olds and old women can fully access. Then she put her eye back to the telescope. There's a chickadee on the 3rd branch, she said. Is there? Yes, it's very small, but it keeps coming back. I picked up my coffee. I looked at the magnolia. I could not see the chickadee from where I was sitting, but I trusted her. Small things that keep coming back, I said. That's something. She made a sound of agreement. We sat there on the porch in the March warmth for another 40 minutes. She moved the telescope from the magnolia to the edge of the yard to the sky, naming things and asking questions and offering theories about bird migration and the distance of stars. And I answered what I could and admitted what I didn't know and felt, in a way that I cannot fully put into words, that I was exactly where I was supposed to be, in the house that had my name on the deed, on the porch that my husband had loved, with the granddaughter who would inherit what I had protected. Later that afternoon, I called Vivian to thank her, properly, not just for the legal work, but for being the person who had picked up the phone at midnight and said I'm already in the car without asking any questions. Vivian said, "Dorothy, can I ask you something?" I said yes. Were you afraid? That night, I thought about standing on that porch at 23 degrees, the deadbolt, the suitcase, the porch light they'd left on, which I still thought was almost polite. Not the way you might think, I said. I was afraid earlier, in October when I first heard Marcus talk about long-term living situations. That night I was afraid because I love my son, and I had just seen what he was capable of choosing. That's a different kind of fear. The cold, the house, that I wasn't afraid of. I had already handled that part. Vivian was quiet for a moment. Then she said, 32 years as a CPA and you're still doing the work. It's all the same work, I said. You keep your records. You document what matters. You don't let anyone else tell the story of what you own. There is something I want to tell you about dignity. Not the word. We use it easily. Dignity. We put it on greeting cards and cross-stitch it on pillows. But the actual practice of it, the daily, unglamorous, invisible labor of it, dignity is not what you feel in the big moments. It is not the speech you give when they finally hear you, or the letter you write when it's all over, or the expression on your face when the papers are served. Those moments are real, but they are not where dignity lives. Dignity lives in what you do when no one is watching. When you go back upstairs and write the date and time in a notebook. When you call your attorney at midnight, not because you are panicking, but because you are prepared. When you sit at a Christmas table with people who are planning to take your home, and you compliment the green bean casserole because it is good, because your integrity does not depend on their behavior. Dignity is documentation. Dignity is patience, exercised not because you are passive, but because you are deliberate. Dignity is knowing the difference between waiting because you are afraid and waiting because you are ready. My father told me, a piece of paper with your name on it is the most powerful thing in the world. He was right. He was also telling me something larger. He was telling me that what you own, your name, your story, your right to the life you built, has to be documented, witnessed, preserved, not assumed, not trusted to other people's goodwill, held by you, in your own hands, in a fireproof box in your own closet. There are people watching this right now who are in some version of what I described. Maybe it's a house. Maybe it's a business. Maybe it's a relationship where someone has been quietly rewriting the story of who you are, planting small doubts, rearranging the furniture of your own life and asking you to be grateful for it. I want you to hear me. You are not imagining it. And the answer is not to get louder. The answer is to get quieter, and more prepared, and more documented, and more patient. And then, when the time is exactly right, to set something on the table that cannot be argued with. Still water runs deep. Not because it is weak, because it has learned that depth is more powerful than noise. I am 67 years old. I live in my house on Maple Hill Drive. My magnolia is in bloom. My granddaughter has a telescope pointed at the sky. My son is figuring out who he is going to be. And I am, finally, completely, at rest. Not because everything is perfect. Not because the fear never comes back, or the grief, or the long evenings when I look at Walter's photograph and feel the weight of doing hard things alone, but because I know what I own. I know what I built, and I know that no one, on Christmas night or any other night, can take that from me unless I let them. Now I want to ask you something. Is there something in your life, a relationship, a property, a situation, where you have been quiet, not because you are at peace, but because you are not yet ready? Where you have been patient in a way that is actually preparation? Tell me about it in the comments. I read every one. And if this story meant something to you today, please hit that like button. It takes 1 second, and it helps this channel find the people who need it. Subscribe to Still Waters if you haven't already. These stories go out every week. Some of them are mine. Some of them are sent to me by women and men who lived something like this and needed someone to tell it the way it deserved to be told. Slowly. Completely. With all the weight it carries. Tell me, where are you watching from right now? What time is it there? Drop it in the comments. I'll be reading tonight. I am Dorothy Mae Caldwell. And I kept my house. Still waters run deep. Thank you for sitting with me in them.